I grew up in a small town that was about 15 minutes outside of Paris. Yes, this story takes place in France. For personal reasons, I'm not going to name the town, but in short, let's just say it's full of a bunch of elderly people who love to give blood donations. I was around 13 to 14 years old. I'm female, and I had recently dropped out of a normal school due to severe bullying. I began doing online school, which was much easier in the sense of less people picking on fights with me. The daily routine me and my family would have would be my older sister leaving early in the morning to go to school, while my dad leaves the same time but goes to the metro to go to work. My mum would stay home with me for a few hours in the morning before going out and doing some work. This would leave me alone all day, except for my mum coming in to get me occasionally when we go out for lunch, until my sister, dad, and mother come back. I didn't really mind being on my own that much, except for my parents who weren't too happy with me being on my own. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to their worries or warnings about the growing dangers in our town and in France in general. When I look back at this now, I realise how weird and slightly creepy this was. I'm just going to tell you what was going on in my town, so that you can understand what I'm going to tell you about. Since there were many elderly people, it was pretty easy for people to break in and rob them. I don't want to sound offensive, but these were Eastern and Romanian old fat men who would come into different towns, including mine, and recruit teenagers to rob houses, while in return they would get money, drugs, and so on. Usually the teenagers would run up and down the streets and ring people's doorbells. Well, I guess I should say fence bells. In France, everyone has a fence around their house, and we do not have guns. Unless you're a hunter, and/or work at a market or something. There's still a lot of restrictions. There's that, and the police officers have guns as well. Anyways, the teens would come up to these people's houses, ring their doorbells, wait a few minutes, and then watch the house for a few minutes, then run off. They usually do this to see who would respond. It was a way of checking to see who's home and if someone was even home or not. When this happens, it's best to call the police. When this happens, the teens try to outrun the cop cars. Sometimes there are fake entrepreneurs who ring people's doorbells and try to get them to open their gates and sell them something. They just really want to get you to open your gate so that they can rob you. Recently, before this incident, an old lady was beaten and robbed because she opened her gate for two police officers. They said they wanted to ask her some questions for a case. They weren't real police officers. Now that you know about all this, my story will make much more sense. The teens running up to people's gates was also a very daily to weekly thing, so we were all used to it. I'm quite a curious person, so when the doorbell rang, I peeped my head out of the curtains to see who it was. I have a really good memory, so I'll remember what this guy looked like. He had one of those American high school sports teams, red and white hoodie things. Sorry, I don't know what they're called. His hair was slightly spiky from what looked like hair gel, and wore dark blue skinny jeans with some white sneakers. Personally, I don't think he saw me at the time, since I just stuck my head through the curtains for a few seconds. I know my parents told me to call the police, but I didn't feel threatened. Besides, he must have known the call the police routine by now. Eventually he left, and I went on back with my work. The next couple of weeks I'd see him come up and ring the doorbell, wait, scan the house, then leave. This started to happen more and more frequently, and I still never called the police on him. I guess I figured that if something were to happen, I'd use my taekwondo on him and his buddies. But I highly doubted something would happen. On some days, he would come early in the morning and watch my father and older sister leave the house, while he just stood there. Then he'd come back when my mum would leave the house in our family car, and he'd watch her drive away. I still didn't think any of this was suspicious or anything bad. It soon got to the point where he would just stand outside the house, across the road, just watching and scanning the house for hours on end, until my mum would come home. One day, I saw him in his usual spot across the street, just staring at the house again. He must have been there for a few hours, until a black tinted window car pulled up. He got in the car and sat there for a few minutes before driving away slowly. I thought this was odd, but I never mentioned it to my parents. Well done, younger me. A few days later, I was doing my schoolwork when my mum told me she was going out to buy something. I just nodded at her and continued my work. This following part will be from what my mother told me. My mum had pulled the car out of the garage and was about to leave the house when she made eye contact with one of the teens. He had some kind of creepy grin on his face. My mum felt something was off and pulled back into the garage and closed the gate. She came upstairs and told me to come with her because she didn't like the way the guy was just standing in front of the house and grinning like that. Personally, I didn't want to get up and go anywhere, but my mum forced me to come with her. When we pulled out of the garage, we were in the street. My mum closed the gate. I turned my head and made eye contact with the teen. He looked really pissed and angry about something. As we drove away, I turned my head back to look at him and saw he was turned towards us, watching me and my mum drive away. He stood there, still looking pissed, until we were out of sight. Once we were out of sight, my mum told me how creepy he looked and called the police to come to the house. Nothing ever came of this, and our house was never robbed. Now that I come to think of this memory, it's much more creepier than I originally saw it as. Like, if he was just checking out the house to see if it was possibly a good place to break into and rob, why did he look so pissed when he saw me in the back seat of my mum's car?